Hi guys, how are you doing? Today we're going to have a read aloud, Maroo of the Winter Caves, chapter 7. But before I start, I would like you to grab paper, sheet of paper, a pencil and an eraser because you're going to write down the answers for my questions. This time I would like you to do something different. You're going to draw a chart just like this one here in the image, this one here, and the first column you're going to put your guess because I'm going to ask you questions and you're going to try to guess, and the second column is going to be actually the answers from the book. Okay, are you ready? You can pause, go grab your paper, draw the chart, and then first column, second column. Okay, I'm going to start. Old Mother and Avni were still calling when she reached the cave. Old Mother smiled and led her inside. Tikek was lying on the furs, her hair draggled and stuck to her face with sweat. Remember that last chapter it finished when the baby was born, right? Her hair draggled and stuck to her face with sweat. She was too tired to speak, but her eyes were bright. The baby lay in the crook of her arm, asleep. Maroo stared at its crumpled old man's face. Can you imagine a baby that was just born? Imagine that. "It's a son," Old Mother said, as proudly as if she had born it herself. The men and children arrived and crowded around. Nimai pushed her away to the front, and Arag began at once to make up a new song. Old Mother shooed them all away, all except Avni and Maroo, who was allowed to stay crouched beside her mother, watching the baby. Outside, she could hear Nimai's voice and the tapping of Arag's finger on the drum. The next day, Tikek got up. She made a sling for the baby from a strip of hide tied around her body and carried him on her back, feeding him whenever he cried. Mostly he slept. Nimai was sent to find soft leaves and moss to tuck inside his fur wrap and keep him dry. And that became her daily task. Tikek soon began to recover her strength, but she was still too weak to travel. Maroo knew that they should have been on their way west ahead. The mornings were cold now, and the last of the fruits and berries had been picked. That night, the adults talked together and decided that Sovi's group should leave the next day, and that Arag's group would follow in their trail a few days later. They had a feast of lemmings roasted on sticks over the fire. And the next morning, Sovi's group rolled up their furs and took the trail to the west. The children clambered to the cliff top and watched until they were out of sight. It was 2 days later that Arag's group took up the trail. The children were sorry to leave the beach. I would too. Can you imagine spending time at the beach? It's so nice. They ran about by the edge of the sea until the last moment, watching the seal people bobbing in the choppy water. They were far out now, and the sea was breaking around them in tufts of white foam. Arag's shouted command brought the children running up the beach with Rival, remember Rival the dog? With Rival bounding beside them. Maroo took up her bundle. Somewhere inside it was a small bag full of shells, which she would spend the winter sewing into a new fur jacket, using the traditional patterns that Old Mother had taught her. Because Tikek tired easily, they traveled more slowly than the others and did not reach the site of the Sovi's first campfire until the middle of the second day. because they were walking slowly because Maroo's mother was still tired. The distance between the two groups gradually increased, but every night they saw the smoke from each other's fires, and Sovi would leave signs and messages for Arag. Once in Sovi's fireplace, they found a pattern of sticks and stones that meant. What do you think that meant? So now I would like you to write in the first column where it says your guesses. I would like you to try to write down what do you think was the message that the Soviets left for Arag's group. Write down. And remember to write full sentences starting with capital letter and finishing with punctuation, correct punctuation, okay? So you can start, for example, I think that the message that the Soviets left meant, and then you say what do you think it meant. If it's necessary, you can pause this video. Are you ready for the real message? So now on the second column, you're going to write, in the second column, you're going to write the real message that they left. Let's see if your guess was good, if you're right. So, they found a pattern of sticks and stones that meant there is good fishing downstreams by the flat rocks. Oh my gosh, can you imagine how hungry they were? And like good fishing downstream by the flat rocks, that's what it meant. So Arag and Vorka went to the place and caught 3 salmon. And that night they sent a signal to Sovi by fanning the fire with a hide so that the smoke went up in bursts. Sometimes Sovi would leave a drawing scratched on a stone. One simply told them, "We tracked a fine buck, but he got away." Another warned them to beware of marshy land lower down the hillside. Sovi's trail went high up into the mountains, and the way was often steep. Because Tikek was still weak, Arag turned off the trail and chose a lower path that made traveling easier. That night, they found for the first time since the journey began that they could not see a signal fire ahead of them. Uh-oh. Do you see problems ahead? Maybe. They had stopped on a large plateau with big tumbled boulders around that would make good shelters, and a high sheer rock wall to the northeast. Although it was sheltered, the place seemed unfriendly in a way Maroo could not explain. Perhaps it was just that they felt lonely without a sign from the other group. Arag made a tune on the drum, and they began to sing and clap. They started loudly, but the voices pattered out and hands paused until only Nimai was still clapping. "Shh!" Tikek told her. Everyone was staring at the rock wall. Someone over there had been singing and clapping with them. Oh my. Who do you think it was? Arag clapped loudly and experimentally. Back came the answer from the rock wall. There was silence. Maroo felt her hair lifting. She could smell fear. Even old mother was afraid. Revo stood erect, growling. They all turned to old mother, looking for guidance. Now I want you to grab your pencil and write in your first column, the first column, write, what do you think old mother will tell them that is that sound? Someone clapping back. What do you think it is? What do you think old mother will answer? Remember, full sentences. I think old mother will answer that. Who is clapping is? Are you ready for the right answer? Let's see what she will say.
It's a spirit,
she said. Sometimes a high rock like this is the home of a calling spirit. So now I would like you to write in the second column the real answer, that it's a spirit. That old mother answered that. Who was clapping was a spirit. Will it harm us? Vorka did not sound hopeful. Maroo wondered if he, too, sensed the atmosphere of the place. I don't know, Old Mother said, but I have always felt afraid of them. Perhaps we should not camp here, suggested a rag. They looked around. It was dusk already. There were no other sheltered places near, and the cat was very tired. We must stay here, Old Mother decided. We will leave a gift for the spirit. The man had a good catch of fish, speared earlier in the day. A rag took the two largest fish and carried them cautiously across the stony ground to the foot of the rock wall. He made a ring of pebbles and placed the offering inside it. Then he came back, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Now we must eat, said Old Mother briskly. They cooked the two remaining fish and broke them into several pieces. Old Mother also shared out dried meat and some dry withered berries. They were still hungry afterward. They had caught fish a few times but had not tasted fresh meat since they left the sea. Old Mother tended the fire while Tikak sucked the baby and the two men made while Tikak suckled the baby and the two men made a rough shelter among some boulders opposite the high rock wall. Old Mother left the fire burning brighter than usual. They guessed it was meant to be precaution against evil spirits, although she said nothing. Maroo crawled into the tiny space where they all huddled together for warmth and rolled herself in her furs. She lay with her face toward the entrance. Between her and the menacing rock wall was the flicker of the fire and the reassuring silhouette of Vorka, who was keeping the first watch. Above the rock wall, she could see a strip of starry sky. One star was brighter than all the others. Iringadu, the evening star. That was the name of the star. She thought of Old Mother, who was named Iringadu after the star. Old Mother had said once that she always felt protected when she could see her star. Maroo fell asleep watching it. She woke in the night and looked out. The darkness was absolute. She sensed that the weather had changed. All but one of two of the stars had been swallowed up by the night. The wind was angry and howled among the rocks above the shelter. There was another sound too, a throaty animal rumbling. The fire had died down to red embers with worms of blackened wood twisting and falling into it. She could see nothing beyond its faint glow. She was frightened and curled up tight against Old Mother, hiding her eyes. Almost at once, it seemed, she was awake again. The night had gone, leaving the sky starless and full of streaming clouds. It was early. The sun was still sleeping. The fire was a heap of gray ash. Vorka's place had been taken by Old Mother. Old Mother, who always woke early, preferred to take the last watch of the night. It had been a cramped night, and everyone was stirring uncomfortably. Maroo found that her legs were numb. Rivo was lying across them. He trotted out when she moved. Old Mother laid a hand on her arm. See, the gift is gone. Maroo peered into the dimness of the foot of the cliff. It was hard to see yet, but she thought Old Mother was right. A rag came out next. I heard the spirit come, he said, while I was watching it in the night. River was awake. He growled when the spirit came. Maroo followed him as he went cautiously toward the offering place to investigate. The ring of stones was broken, and the fish had been dragged out and eaten. There were no prints on the rocky ground, but there was a smell of lingering. Cat-like, Maroo thought. Lynx or cave lion. Arag agreed. The spirit came as a great cat, he said. Maroo imagined a gigantic lynx with great yellow eyes and claws curved and gleaming like the new moon. Arag led the way back to the camp. Vorka was outside now, and he and Arag made a circuit of the camp, looking at the morning, as they called it. The children followed them, and the men pointed out to the signs they must learn to recognize. Crevice in the rock, where owls were nesting, betrayed by regurgitated balls of fur and feathers nearby. Arag picked one up and showed the children that the owl had eaten voles and a hare. In another crevice, the smell of fox was strong. Higher up, they found droppings, clumps of small black pellets. So now I would like you to think, what do you think that means? What do you think is the animal that is around or was around? Now, first column, you're going to try to guess. What do you think was the animal that left these droppings, clumps of small black pellets? First column. Are you ready for the answer? Ibex, Vorka said, not aloud, but by making the ibex sign with his hands. Even when they were not hunting, they avoided talking when possible. Old Mother had a saying, the hunter who chatters will catch only carrion. So, second column, you're going to write that the animal that they were talking about is ibex. Now we're going to stop and you're going to answer these questions and check how many guesses you are right or wrong. We are in the middle of chapter 7, so I'll continue this chapter next time, okay? See you later, alligator!